I think between 10 and 12,000 lions in 336 captive bred industries, farms in this country, which is outrageous. This was exposed in the Cook Report in 1997. Blood Lions film went worldwide in 2015. Lord Ashcroft's Unfair Game came out in 2020, and now Richard's Lions, Bones, Bullets. You think by now everybody would know that this is an appalling industry. It is filtering into Parliament. The Portfolio Committee, which happened in 2018, really came out against the industry. And Mapulani, Shloki Mapulani was the chair at the time. He was good, but he was so good they moved him somewhere else. So we don't have him anymore. This was amplified by the high-level panel pulled together by Barbara Creasy in 2020, and into elephants, lions, leopards, and rhinos. And it stated quite boldly that the captive lion industry was an embarrassment to South Africa. It was, it's ruining the reputation, called for the halt of the domestication of lions. She said she'd appoint a task team, and we're going to be thinking about that. I think Ulrich might be, probably you guys might be the next on that task team. Now, there are two people sitting here on that task team. You're on the task team, you're on the task team. I should have. Now, that's encouraging. I'm cautiously optimistic again. That there's a task team and there's some really, really good people on it to talk about the industry. So, that's the history of how we got here. And we're sitting with key people in this process who have been part of that process all along. And they're still in it. God, I don't know how they have the strength to do it, but they keep hammering away to try and sort this thing out. Now, I'm going to take, just to chuck out some questions, and if you don't want to answer me, answer some other question that you feel you need. But Richard, I'm going to start with you. Why are you focusing on lions as an iconic predator? How did you come to lions? You talked about it a bit in the film, but would you like to just expand a bit on that?
Working. Yeah, I suppose in my case, I sort of, let's just see how far you need to be away of the guinea pig. I suppose in my case, I sort of never grew up really. I mean, as a little boy, I was always interested in the animal world, but it's quite difficult to get interested in worms or slugs or something. So I was always interested in apex predators and the sort of exciting guys. And from a very, very young age, sharks became an utter obsession with me. And I suppose it's a bit of an ego thing, really. I've always had to feel that what I do is making a difference. And when I started with sharks, we weren't very many of us. And by the time I stopped, there were loads. And by that time, I was becoming very aware of the captive lion breeding industry in Canada. So I kind of swapped one sexy predator for another and fell in love with the next one. And this one, I'm not going anywhere until there's an end result. This might sound rather dopey and pathetic, but I promised your lives 4 years ago that I would be around trying to sort of take this, help to take it in a small way. And all I do is, I'm not an expert on anything, but I think you well know from many occurrences we've done together. I'm just a communicator, and I hope whatever communication skills I've got will be deployed to help take this forward. And this is an example. I hope. Oh, yes. I think that's how it works.
Thank you, Chris. Richard, you're the storyteller. Every process needs a storyteller, and you are the storyteller. So keep telling that story. I'm just going to jump around. Peter, you're the cold face of the horror of what we've been seeing. Could you look into some of the diseases, the injuries, the stuff that you see? That you might, what did you say?
Yeah. I feel that after all these years of being veterinary science and working with wildlife, various species, from conservation to captivity and so on. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to select who I do work for and what I do work for, and obviously my life has been revolving around conservation and the ethical, everything around animals in an ethical manner, and that's how I practice veterinary science as well. Looking at the lion industry, what's happened in this country, I became appalled many years ago about what's happening. I got called by various colleagues who referred animals to me from different sectors, whether they lion breeders or sanctuaries or so-called sanctuaries. There's many of these places call themselves sanctuaries under the auspices of doing research and breeding and so on like that. And obviously, my studying a BSc animal science with nutrition, I started looking into the way these animals are kept and how they feed them, and also the kind of diseases that they get in captivity. And I started lobbying for bigger environments for these animals to live in, and no breeding policy, because these animals breed so well in the wild. I mean, we've even got contraceptive techniques that we're using out in fence reserves in the population to try and control these animals breeding. So there's no need to breed these animals in captivity. There's no need to do research on breeding of these animals under the auspices that it's a rare gene line, or it's a white line, or that's a lot of rubbish. So what I've been looking at is different methods of controlling breeding of these animals, and also the nutrition. And the biggest issue we have is disease, metabolic diseases, where these animals suffer from metabolic bone diseases. They have spinal development issues. They have, I mean, you saw Carlos in the movie, and that we just talked about as well. And that's Panthera Africa. Now, those are animals that were born in an environment, first of all, that is compromised. Genetically, they were compromised, nutritionally compromised, husbandry and hygiene compromised. So they were exposed to everything that one mind can be exposed to, all in one. A disease, viral disease, a bacterial viral meningitis. We've got looking at metabolic bone disease, insufficient, and not only supplementation, but balance. We call it optimal balance. So looking at a supplement, which I, in my opinion, think those animals never got. They got thrown a lot of rubbish to eat, and they got off cuts of different types of meats. And most people think that, well, these animals eat meat in the wild, you know, what more do they need? So you just throw them a piece of meat, but it's not. Meat doesn't contain all the elements. And we, you know, lions would eat the whole carcass, which involves intestinal content and rumen content. They would chew on little herbs and plants out in the wild and so on, and get a lot of nutrients in that way. Now you take these animals, you put them in a fenced little camp of less than a hectare, and you expect them to thrive. But to most people, sorry, you got to stop me because I can talk here. The point I'm trying to make is that I deal with diseases, not only viral and bacterial and hygiene and botulism and E. coli and salmonella and all those kinds, but I also deal with nutrition and the suffering that all of these things cause these lines of captivity. And all those farmers need is they need one animal to survive, and they'll make the money and make up for that 10 that died. So they don't care about the 10 that died. That one animal that survives, yes, it's maybe a super lion, it's got genetics to fight against all the diseases in captivity, and it does. But like, they say, well, if that lion can survive or that cow can survive, why can't that one? There we go.
I want to jump around. Catherine, I'm going to come to you. You had a journey from one side to the other. Could you just briefly describe how you did that and what happened to you?
Yeah, so you can hear my accent. I'm not from here. So my first start to South Africa, I came here as a volunteer. I had seen these beautiful lion cubs on the internet and come and save them. You can be part of conservation. You will be here to be their mother, and you can be a part and support the conservation work. So I ended up in South Africa, and then long story short, there were in particular 4 beautiful lion cubs that captured my heart. And on one particular day, those 4 were sent away. And then I started, and I was like, where are they going? Are they not staying? No, we're just raising them for someone else. I was like, where are they going? They're going to a breeding facility. What happens at the breeding facility? And this is now 11 years ago. And it took my beloved wife and myself about 2 weeks, and we managed to get ourselves into that facility. And that day is the main reason why I'm here. What met me both like in vision, but also emotionally. The deformed animals, they were hugely traumatized. And I remember I turned around and there I saw my 4 lions just looking at me and help. And so I broke down. I started to cry, and I went to my blessed white lion, Oliver, and I said, one day I will come and fetch you. And little did I know that I was going to stop working in Norway, but yeah, the son and myself, 2 years later, we then started Panthera Africa and wanted to be the change of this industry.
So most people would go, that's a bad thing, you took us all the way. That's amazing. It's very emotional when a lion looks at you, it's the same. Oh, can you talk a bit about the value or the lack of value and the danger of captive breeding? I mean, it's an industry. It doesn't have a contribution to conservation. Can you just talk a little bit more?
Sure, okay. I mean, I've always come at this issue. I think it's quite a while and probably a bit of a later arrival in the issue from the situation of lions in the wild and how things might affect each other. And so, I mean, I think categorically, all the work that's been done shows that this industry has got no conservation value. It's actually going to detract, economically from South Africa's value as a tourism destination, etc. But the question still remains for an ecologist, how is this affecting lions in the world? So my sort of first most tangible experience of this was when I was still working for Panthera. We were funding a lion conservation project in Mozambique in Limpopo National Park. And we actually had to close the project down because it became untenable for us to operate in the park because it was actually dangerous for our researcher to be on the ground there. He would have been killed. There was such an escalation in violence around trying to kill lions, rhinos, and elephants where he was working, and he was so close to the coalface of that, and didn't perhaps have the training to deal with the situation that he was getting himself into. But the net effect of all of this escalation, and the same syndicates involved in poaching rhinos and elephants in Kruger Park started to migrate into also wanting to get lion products. Same channels are flowing through to Asia. And so there we saw a population of 100 lions that was already under a lot of pressure from all the typical human threats that lions face in these wild areas, poaching and conflict with humans, etc. But we just saw a population crash, and this population was right next door to Kruger Park, urban fence line. So the Kruger Park would obviously act as a source for the lions in Limpopo National Park, but nevertheless, they basically crashed out to very few individuals, and it became unsafe to work with. And it's really interesting. It started making me think a little bit about how we rank the threats that lions face in the wild. Because typically, if you speak to any lion conservationist, they'll all tell you that, well, the science has shown that poaching of lions' prey and the depletion of prey in the ecosystem is the biggest threat to lions. And that is typically followed by, and it depends a little bit on the system, things like conflict with humans, where lions go and kill people's cattle and people retributionally kill lions in return. And those two threats are sort of listed as the primary threats to lions. And I'm busy doing an analysis at the moment to try and develop an action plan for lions in Central and West Africa. And there clearly, yes, those two threats prevail and are very significant. But also what we're starting to learn now, because we get more and more people working in the sort of trafficking space and trying to collect information on trafficking, we're starting to realize that for a long period of time, and probably unawares to us, there's been very high levels of trade in lion body parts in that region as well. A lot of it is within region, but of course, if you've got people from other continents who want a product, they will quickly align with people in those continents who are really trading in those products and potentially use them as a source to get them. And so we're learning in those reserves that in many places there's sufficient prey. There isn't any conflict with humans, but there are no lions. And it's because poachers have been killing and are killing lions for body parts in those regions as well. So throughout Africa, we're starting to realize that lions are part of the bag, they're part of the suite of animals that poachers target. And if they are incentivized through the sorts of amounts of money that are involved in these carcasses, even just faces and feet, that just motivates them to work a little bit harder and to target lions as well. And in fact, like in Mole National Park in Ghana, the cadre of hunters around the park there, they can only become an elite hunter if they've hunted a lion. But they're hunting in a park where there are no lions left. The lions are extinct in Mole. They're extinct in Congo. They're extinct in most of the protected areas in West Africa at least, and are doing very badly, etc. And so this pervasive threat has largely got undetected, I think, with lions. And South Africa has just really added a lot of fuel to that fire by allowing our legal framework to allow this trade and then to almost incentivize the black market and the legal trade simultaneously.
So really, what you're saying is that the argument of lion bone traders would be that they are protecting lions because they're providing the product, but quite the opposite is true.
Yeah, they can't protect the lions because it's an issue of scale of market. So Ross Harvey mentioned it there. You've got 1 billion people that might want to partake in a certain product. And the lions are not bred. You know, we can produce loads of bread in billions. And they said we have no supply and demand issues. But for lions, we have a huge supply and demand issue. We have a massive potential demand, a demand which has been stimulated in recent years by new products entering the market. Lions weren't part of that product chain until 10, 15 years ago. Now suddenly lion parts are either masquerading as tiger parts or being sold directly as lion parts. And then these traders and people involved, which went to see that those people are nimble. These are businessmen who can quickly, come up with new products. And so there's a huge demand. And if we were able to meet that sort of supply side of it, what would our world look like in South Africa? We talk about 10, 12,000 lions in captivity. That's probably the peak. It's probably the farmers have probably brought that down a bit recently. But imagine a future with 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 lions in captivity. At the minute you can produce a lion economically viably, that you don't have to hunt it, you just breed it and you can kill it and convert it into body parts and sell those and then make enough money to offset your costs to get it to that point. That's a really big problem. And we were at that tipping, we actually are sort of at that tipping scale now where people are starting to think, well, we don't need to hunt them, we can just breed them, kill them, cut them up and send them off. But, not a good place to be.
That's truly terrifying. Thank you. Audrey, HSI-Africa has been in the forefront of pushing legislation because it's where the rubber hits the road, if it does, if we have a decent police force, that's not matter. What are your thoughts on the domestic, the documentation that's being developed and the processes? What about the processes towards closing the lion industry? could you just have a look at, is that a space that that HSI is being in?
So HSI is definitely involved in a lot of the policy training together with a lot of our colleagues here. And how to put this politely, while there have been some advancements, they have been very, very slow. I mean, we heard that the first panel on captive lion breeding was convened in 2005. And at that time, there were about 2,500, big one, 3,000 lions. And at that stage, they kind of threw their hands up and said, oh, woe is me, there's just too many lions to deal with at that stage. Now we're sitting with 12,000 lions and we're sitting at a crisis point. And since that time, there have been various forums that have been convened, colloquium, high-level panel, and a number of NGOs, of which HSI, Bloodlines, Four Paws, etc., have submitted numerous documentations. We even submitted a proposal on the way forward, which included suggestions for an audit and a way forward, which included, a moratorium on breeding, etc. And a blind eye was turned to that. And so whilst the high-level panel report was promising, and it did seem to, say the right things with regards to captive lion breeding, including that it should be brought to an end, and it was very damaging for South Africa's reputation, it kind of stopped there. And the white papers then also acknowledged the welfare, some of the welfare concerns. But this is many years down the road, and basically no action has been taken in our view. The immediate actions of the high-level panel reports have not been implemented. Captive lion breeding continues. We are aware that permits for new facilities have been issued and continue to be issued. So, the moratorium on breeding has not been extended. And so, the cats in existing facilities continue to breed out instead of just being allowed to naturally die out and bring into that breeding. Essentially, no effect has been given to the recent court judgments that are addressing animal welfare, and illegal exports of lion bones still continue, in spite of the fact that there is a zero lion bone export quota for this year. So, we are pleased that there is a ministerial. Well, I wouldn't go that far. We are pleased that there is a ministerial task force team, and we're very proud that Dr. Caldwell and Dr. de Waal are on the panel. We have seen the terms of reference. We hope that steady ground will be gained, but again, we hope that it's not once again talk about the same issues. That action will be forthcoming, and the concern is that the voluntary action is not going to be just that for those that will opt that this will finally be the closure that we seek. After all these years, the black needs to stop.
There's a question that's just come in, and you're a specialist on contraception, and so I'm going to throw the question at you because it's connected. I mean, the question is, if you're a closed industry, is there a plan for activists to do something to help the captive lions? What are we going to do with 12,000 lions? Are we going to euthanize them? Can it be done Canadian? Should be.
So I think what needs to happen first and foremost, before we can even start answering those questions, is we need to do an audit. We need to know what we're dealing with. We need to know what the demography of the lions is, what are the ages, what are the sex classes, etc., so that we can understand what we are dealing with. So, and I think we need to make a clear distinction. When we talk about euthanasia, we refer to euthanasia as those animals that are aged or sick that need that type of intervention. And I'm not a veterinarian. Dr. Caldwell can better answer that question, but in my mind, that is what we refer to euthanasia as. Secondly, if we're going to then address that segment of the population, that is how we should do it for those animals. And then, if, you know, in terms of sterilization or contraception, would just prevent the breeding. Sterilization would actually prohibit complete breeding. So we need to be clear on that. And then talk about what the future is for those animals, and where those animals may go and where they will end up. I think what we need to address as well is there are organizations out there that would be willing to support you know, these types of rollout plans and interventions. Not to say that the onus and the responsibility should not lie with these facilities and breeders in themselves. But before we can make any sound decisions, the baseline data needs to be obtained so that we know what we're dealing with.
Okay, thank you. Louise, you've been on the task, and it'd be interesting to know your thoughts about what you hope that will happen then. And you've also, Bloodlines has also produced some peer-reviewed papers on the capital industry. That's part of my question. The other part is a question that has come in on Zoom, and that is there hope in sanctions, being part of the solution here, given the latest COP didn't look very encouraging. The slide is COP 20, was it 15 or something? Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I think I can only corroborate what a lot of people have been saying here already. As with the task team, it's only just been established. We've got very clear terms of reference that we need to work around and towards. Currently, we have about just over 6 months, I believe, Peter. It needs to be finished by June, the end of June, which is quite a task. One of the points that we have to achieve is actually a national audit, which I'm very pleased to see, because as Audrey was saying, really nobody has any idea about the extent of this industry. Even the provinces who actually issue permits, they don't even know exactly what's going on in their provinces. So I think a realistic audit needs to be carried out. We need to sort of look at every single facility in South Africa that actually holds lions, whether it's commercially or not, because there is no baseline data. And as Audrey is saying as well, we need to know what are the animals, how many, what are the sexes, what are their health issues. And what I'm very keen, and I'm sure a few other people on the task team as well, we also need to start looking at other animals that are actually held at those facilities, because it's really not good enough to just be talking about lions. There's a huge number of other predators, and we might be solving the lion issue, and then breeders will just change their focus on the different animal, different species, and we're going to be in the same situation in a few years' time. So I think, although that is not part of the terms of reference for the task team, from a personal perspective, that is something that I feel very strongly about. CITES, yes. It's not face enough. I think it is very, very hard. How can an organization who are actively encouraging trade in wildlife be part of the solution? And I think there's so many ways to circumvent the legal trade as well, and that is part of the main issue here. We're not just talking about legal, we're also talking about illegal trades. We're talking about not just trade in trophies, not just trade in body parts, bones, teeth, claws, skins, but we're also talking about live trade as well, where these animals are traded live to facilities, very often in Southeast Asia, where they're being bred, they're going to circuses, they're going into zoos. Their welfare is highly compromised. So very complex, huge task ahead. But I have to say, I'm very excited. I think we've never been this close. And I think it is an exciting development to be part of this process.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask one thing. Part of the task team focus areas was the voluntary disposal of lions, the voluntary closure. Now, how on earth are you going to get, and what are the, how do you get people who dug into this, as we've seen on the farm, going to voluntarily stop from lions?
I think it is part of the problem, but I think we can see this hopefully as step one, where we actually develop a model, a protocol of how to go about closing some of these facilities. And I'm sure there are some people out there that see the writing on the wall and may want to actually give up on a voluntary basis. So I see it as a way of being part of developing a model with protocols that there aren't any unintended consequences for both animals and people to start phasing out this industry. And then that model can hopefully be used to start phasing out the rest of the industry as well. But then we need to have legislation to back it up.
Yeah, I spoke to somebody who's involved in this, and he said that given that the government failed to stop the rhino trade in a court case, if they had forced the closure of all these lion farms, they would be buried in litigation for years. That's why the voluntary stuff was stuck in there. Yeah. Richard, you had a...
Yeah, I went through the task force notes recently. Number 2.4 in the section headed "Focus Areas for the Task Team" states: identify, mobilize, and endorse potential funding mechanisms, sources, and procedures to support the voluntary exit strategies profit. Since I've been back, I've been very impressed by some research I've done on, let's say, the other side of the wall. Now, I've spoken to lots of people on the breeding side, I've spoken to several legal people, and many of them tell me that without lion farmers being in some way a satisfactory way to them, financially compensating, they would simply take the couple to court and stop us. And what I don't want is to be writing another book and another film in 10, 15 years' time. So do you see these funding mechanisms helping to stop these legal challenges? In other words, is there going to be a way to financially compensate lion farmers and stop these legal challenges from stopping the whole process?
Yeah, I think that's a really hard question to answer, Richard, because obviously there's no money forthcoming from government, as I understand it, for any kind of compensation. So it is part of the task team that we need to look at. It's a little bit early to really say anything. We've hardly met, so maybe we should have this conversation, in a few months' time again. But yeah, maybe Peter also wants to comment. But we will have to find ways. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to really comment on this. I find it sort of a little bit premature at the moment, I think, but maybe Peter is willing to say something.
Not cautious.
Obviously, as a task team, we have to sign a confidentiality thoughts with respect to the initial topics that was brought up, but there are a lot of personal opinions, and as a veterinarian doing work for most true sanctuaries in the country, I feel that I can be a voice for these sanctuaries because there's not a single person on the casting that's from a sanctuary for obvious reasons. But relating to compensation, in my opinion, is that years ago, with respect to the wild cheetah project and the Anderson Bay Cheetah Centre and so on, they compensated farmers for cheetahs that forced them to relocate, and it opened a whole new can of worms. I do feel that the government will and won't have enough finances to supply lion farmers with what they need. You're going to have lion farmers that have 3 or 4 farms. They're going to want to close down one farm because they've got 6 lazy lions and then one big strong lion from one farm to the other and so on. So theoretically speaking, a compensation system where monetary value gets put down, in my opinion, is not practical. We're going to have to circumvent that, and we're going to have to build a model, as Louise says, in the models, and we have to be very specific. I was initially very negative about the voluntary exit principle. Yeah, I thought, wow, if we're going to make a law and an act and put it in legislation, we may as well make a law. But from a human point of view, from a staff point of view, on this one, it's not going to be practical. So compensation is going to be a very debatable point in our meeting, I think, and how we're going to circumvent that.
I want to ask members of the panel if they, I mean, I asked some questions, but I'm sure you have answers to questions I haven't even thought of. So perhaps you want to put up your hand, and then I'll open to the floor for questions. Anybody want to?
No, because I imagine that's saying the confidentiality. I've actually run 6 of them up the last 2 days, and we've watched it. So I said we get to work. So what I was thinking about there just seems to be a real danger that it'll get right down the track, and then because there is a legal case that you take someone's livelihood away and you destroy the value of that spot, you take it straight to court, it stops again, and that really puts a shove in my back. And I would have thought, in a way, maybe you could head that off by planning some sort of head-off approach into the thing now. Because I know, I've talked to them, I know exactly what they're planning. And they're pretty united. They've got an awful lot of money at their disposal, they're ready to deploy. And they feel they've got a rock-solid legal case. So I just throw that out there. That doesn't feel being a huge lot of hope on the claim. Anyway, good question.
I think it's a good point, Richard, and obviously, the government has to take on this and stop that, because it has always been a concern of theirs, not just with this species, but the rhino point, as was mentioned. But I think certainly with regard to lion, there have been some papers that have been done by other conservation ecologists, economists like Ross Hobby. And Ross actually did quite a good paper that reviewed, the whole economics behind captive lion breeding and the whole job situation and what that entails. So I think there is a good argument to be made for what the industry brings in and how that could be turned around. And I think it would be very difficult to refute that peer-reviewed publication. We never had that sort of information before, and I think it's quite important that that actually be taken into regard, and that it stands up. Before we've always only had sort of one voice that spoke to that, but we have now got this additional data. And I think the point was made in the movie by itself, that we're talking about a very elite, small sector that is benefiting. So we really need to outweigh the bigger picture here and what it means, and look at the benefits for not just a small segment of breeders. But I would strongly advise that people do look at that paper, which is basically a cost-benefit analysis of the captive breeding industry by Dr. Harvey. It really throws into good report.
While everybody else thinks what to say, I'm going to say something. Well, the thing that concerns me is that whenever farmers or people dealing with wildlife are challenged, and they throw back sustainable use, and they will say we are sustainable use. We have a right. People have a right to use wildlife. The rollout of that has been what I'm seeing in the Department of Agriculture, which I talked about, is where we have 93 wild animals on the way to being reclassified as farm animals. There's a huge lobby, obviously, that has great influence in the departments within the farming and not only line farming, but across the board. And I just wondered if anybody would pick up that sustainable use thing, Paul.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I think what we've done in South Africa is we've prostituted the concept of sustainable use. So, as an ecologist, you would be thinking about a resource or a species living in the wild, how abundant it is, what the impact of human use might be on it, and ways to minimize that use to the point that the species can continue to exist, etc. So that's really where the concept of sustainable use comes from. And that is such a robust sort of notion that it's hard to challenge. But the minute you take that concept, I mean, you apply it to an animal production system, which is like activity, that term is not part of business and farming principles. It's the term and the concept is being misused in the structuring of the arguments. And so, obviously, once an animal is in captivity or removed from the wild and how you're breeding it, etc., all questions and issues of sustainable use fall by the wayside. And so, unfortunately, people use that term, and that's one of the problems here. Getting back to the farmers, and this is essentially a production system that they've got. I'm really concerned, and I share your concerns, that in 10 or 12 years' time we'll be sitting in the same place because legal challenges will allow the guys to sort of carry on in a stop-start fashion, auditing, etc. All of these wonderful ideas, which essentially, in some ways, sugarcoat the sort of real issue. And the real issue is we don't want these lines to anymore. If the government was big enough and brave enough and bold enough to say we are going to close it down regardless, the farmers would then be in the situation that they would have to make the decisions. They're going to have this, their resources, their animals that they have in captivity. Ultimately, they are responsible for them. Are we going to see a massive amount of animal abuse issues? Yes, we will. I have no doubt. But we've got to get through that point. I think we're stalling it. The government's stalling it. Everyone's stalling it because they can't get that mandate to really address the situation head on. It will always be stalled in court challenges, in requirements of this research or that panel or this, etc. And I don't know how we get past that. I really don't. I don't think we will.
No, okay.
I would love to be set right on this.
I'm going to open to the floor. Just a last thought. I know it sounds ridiculous to even ask this question, but do we as humans have a right to assume we can use other creatures? We simply absorb that right as being the right of being human. But these are other nations. If we don't see them like that, we can use them. These are other nations that we share the planet with. And we simply assume we have a right of the God-given right. So I'm going to stop there. It's sky, blue sky one, and ask if there's anybody in the audience who'd like to. And we don't have, I don't think, a roaming mic, so you have to ask quite loud.
So I have one comment and one question. The comment that I have is, with so many documentaries recently going out with people looking at commercial agriculture, that's the dairy farms, like Casper's and that type of things, it is proven over and over again that commercial farming is actually not sustainable. It is not sustainable consumption. So for that term even to be used in the wildlife trade just shocks me, because even in normal agricultural practices, it's found not to be sustainable. And secondly, recently, my question is, early in December, the US actually signed into policy the ban of owning of big cats and the public interaction with big cats. But how is that actually going to have a knock-on effect on us with our big cat trade? And where is it actually going to have us end up on the black market?
Thank you. Who wants to pick that up? I think we're being, I just want to say, service again, I think we're being recorded, so I think we'll use the microphone because that's how your questions get recorded.
So, thank you. I just wanted to answer one part of the question and then open up to the rest of the panel members who I think will probably do a better job than I would. But yes, that policy in the US is fantastic. It has been a long time in coming. I know that our US affiliates have worked very hard on that as well. So definitely a shout out there. I think it's a brilliant act, which will basically prohibit the keeping and interaction of the public with big cats. I think one of the challenges that we're going to have here and that we have here is basically that, for example, tigers are seen as exotic animals. And so we don't even have any legislation to prohibit that. And so that's why we're seeing all these incidences of tigers in Benoni backyards, Benoni Boxwood backyards, etc. Because literally anybody can own a tiger or any other exotic cat as a pet, with no standards on housing, keeping, etc. And so when we don't even have those fundamentals controlled, how on earth are we going to stamp that out? And which is why Louise made such a good point about auditing of these facilities and knowing what we have to deal with there. Because as we've said, today it's lions, 12,000 lions. Tomorrow it could be 15,000 tigers or jaguars. We know from work that we've done in South America that they're already farming of jaguars, following the models of captive lion breeding in South Africa. So we are setting a devastating trend that has huge consequences globally. And these are the types of repercussions that perhaps our policymakers are not aware of or taking cognizance of. And so until we get these types of basic legislations sorted, we are not going to resolve these problems.
Any other questions?
Sorry, as far as production animal goes and farming of animals as well, it's just a comment which supports what you say is that looking at South Africa and the economy of South Africa and the economic situation we're sitting in, one of the most expensive forms of nutrition is protein, and we have human beings suffering, and that's one of the big points that we're looking at is having captive animals having to eat one of the most expensive sources of food and protein sources that is not sustainable, it will never be sustainable, and it will possibly be something that will be brought up in court as well relating to a One Health situation with respect to human animal, and that's what we're looking at, basically, One Health.
Sorry, for some reason, I didn't get a connection. Are you actually saying we shouldn't eat meat?
You need a high F3+ iron content in your diet. So meat is considered a fairly important form of nutrition, but there are very many ways to get around it. But what I'm saying is, if you're looking at South African population, it's a culture to eat meat and want to eat meat and the requirement of meat. So it's only the very low 1% that are able to afford to buy nutrients without, or buy food with the nutrients that meat contain. So it's an economical balance.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Audrey was saying in terms of legislation as well, very quickly, is that we also sit in this situation in South Africa where we have national legislation that is translated to 9 different provincial sets of legislation. And some of that legislation is hugely outdated as well. And it varies across the board. And when we look at big cats in particular, and big cats in captivity, there is just so many differences between the provinces. So I just don't know how we're going to deal with that and solving that legislation conundrum, because it is, when you look at a Western Cape where you can't breed big cats to provinces where you can do whatever you like. I'm never use a bad word. And then provinces where you can just build euthanize, it's just astounding. And then, as you mentioned, in Gauteng, where people can just keep a tiger in the backyard because it's exotic. So yeah, on top of that, we sit with that ridiculous sort of 9 provincial sets of legislation around the issue as well.
Okay. There's one solution to that, is to regulate nature conservation on a national level, and with all big cats and all carnivores, because this is speaking, regulated on a national. I deal with nature conservation in every single province of the country all the time. It's a nightmare. Just regulate it on a national level.
Or the Western Cape can just sleep in the country and declare itself a country.
Yeah. 5 years ago, Richard and I did. Can you hear me? Yeah. 5 years ago, Richard and myself did research around Johannesburg. I was quite astounded at volunteers who come from abroad having to pay £1,000 plus to bottle feed cubs, and the volunteers actually were clueless at the fact where do the cubs go when they're fully grown or they can't handle them anymore. And we spoke to a lot of these volunteers and we said, do you know where they go? And they said no. But then they go on to being petted and then walked or whatever they do. And shouldn't that be stopped? They're advertising to get these volunteers out, but the money is actually going to the pocket of these breeders. And it's wrong, totally wrong. And I just felt, I was quite shocked when we were interviewing these girls. That's my feeling. I don't know how to feel about that.
Okay, thanks. Just before we get an answer, you've probably seen pop stars when they're on stage singing like this. That's because the top of the mic is where you need to talk into, not the side of it. Just a process and think about it.
I'm happy to say that. I'm sorry, that made me giggle. I think this is something that Bloodlines has been campaigning around and raising awareness together with many of our colleagues here on the table as well. It is a major issue, and it was part of the HLP recommendations to actually stop the interaction with captive lions as well. So it has to be part of that complete picture. It is a complex industry. There's a lot of different sectors that are involved. So it needs a holistic approach in my view. Otherwise, we will never solve the situation. We cannot solve part of it and not another part. If we still allow volunteers to come and rescue these orphaned lions, then we still sit with that problem, because what will happen with those animals? So it is absolutely something that needs to be taken into consideration and needs to be solved, and it was part of the HSI recommendation.
I think that's a very important point, and HSI have done surveys as far back as 2018, and the surveys were, amongst other things, to determine public perception on captive lion breeding and can hunting. And we were actually quite surprised in 2018's results, because there was a definite mismatch between people's understanding of what lion interaction and the end product of captive and canned lion hunting and the bone trade was. They didn't understand that there was a direct connection, which was a real shock to us. People really bought into this perception that they were really doing a bit for conservation, that, these cubs really had, were orphans, and that they were doing their bit. We've continued the survey in 2020 and 2022, and there definitely is a shift in awareness. People are now understanding that everything is linked, but it has taken time, and it definitely is because of the education through works of bloodlines and LBB, etc. But the point is, the awareness needs to be created, and we need to, each one of us, play a role in that by educating people and not participating in or supporting in any way facilities that do offer these types of interactions, and so that's educating your friends and family, anybody that comes out and thinks that they're going to go and see a lion in the facility, and it's just because that's the closest they can get to the wild. Don't do it, wild. Don't do those.
Sorry, I want to ask a question there. Then we'll go back to the subject of this.
Thank you. It is on, yeah.
Just start.
Firstly, that's really getting me going. Firstly, I think to your point about nations and other species, humans are really doomed until we learn compassion for everything around us, animate and inanimate. And I think this is going to be the challenge humans will face. Capitalism, greed is just driving everyone down a sinking path, basically. Back to the topic at hand. Questions around, and there's so many questions here, around how do you actually close down an industry? We're ready. You are saying there's no export quota this year. There may not be one next year. You can't capture hunt. So on what basis are you allowed to have an industry that is open and allowed to be? On what basis can you be in business where clearly you have to be engaging in illicit trade to keep it alive? And so you're setting mixed examples here. You're not examples. You're setting mixed messages in terms of legislation and the practicality. Peter, I hear completely your view about if there's a financial reward, it will be abused. And you're setting yourself up for failure. So I don't have the answer. I don't even have a suggestion, but just a thought that came to me here was if one said, not that you want to keep the industry open for 5 years, seeing that you can't trade anyway. But if you were to say, let's try and cut off any more cubs being born into the industry. So if there was some type of financial incentive that said, a lion, if it's possible to do this, a lion that is 8 years old, that you voluntarily turn in, will get rewarded with 5 or 10,000 rand. And you set it in such a way that it's not possible for them to get reward for any cub that is born after July is coming in. So that they're not incentivized to bring any more into the system, but through an age process, if you can identify the age accurately, you could say, we will give you 5 years to enter this industry. Given that there is legislation that prohibits you anyway, so you can only be doing this legally. How you do it, how you do an audit of what you think is 338 farms in a short space of time, I've got no idea. And how you stop this industry then going underground, almost literally, as cannabis was found in Holland in the 1980s, people who are growing it in the attic of lights. You know, how you actually stop this industry is another story. But I think there's got to be some way, because I think Richard is correct. Going to court and saying you're taking away my livelihood. I mean, 600 jobs or 6,000 jobs in the context of unemployment in this country is enough. Nothing against the 600 people that are employed. But it cannot be allowed to sustain that on that basis. So that poor challenge has to be avoided. And if it's going to result in a compromise where some type of incentive is given for them to close down, at the same time stopping them point blank from bringing any more cuts into the industry, maybe that's a way out.
Thank you. That's a kunji onto the panel. Thank you very much. I don't see any hands. Do you have them? And then,
Yeah, this was with reference, sorry. With reference to volunteering, and very to the point that things are changing. So 11 years ago, I came to this country. I'd never even heard about any illegal or abuse or anything. It was just come and save them. But I can say we are now turning 8 years next year. And from the start, I think maybe 10% of our volunteers knew about this whole industry. Today, 8 years later, I would say 90% of our volunteers know about this industry, and they are specifically coming to us because of they are Googling ethical volunteering or animal welfare or true sanctuaries. And so I know this, like you said, it's a lot of doom and gloom, but like there is hope, because in my opinion, humans are waking up, like the documentaries that you referred to earlier. People are not wanting to be a part of this anymore. So yes, governments, it's very, like for me, I always say that it's easy to say, well, the governments are not doing anything. So then let's like we need to sit and wait. All of us have a responsibility. All of us can make a difference, and that is where the change comes in.
No, I don't know, Kat, you can tell me, do volunteers in Africa wear school tests?
Yes, yes, yes.
They do. Okay, I spend 3 months a year going around colleges, universities, schools, etc., talking, and I'm continually asked where can I volunteer? Not just for lions, but for sharks, for lots of stuff. And that's an excellent website, and I think possibly perhaps the NGOs ought to band together and make the students of the world more aware of where they can look to get the right advice. Because an awful lot of them are not going to, spend an awful lot of effort, but that was a concise place that just picked out all the really bad guys. I thought it had huge, huge value. And I'd refer everybody to that. Maybe that's a step that can be taken to promote that sort of thing, or maybe start a new one, even better yourselves.
No, just as a follow-up from what Richard is saying, just to make people aware that SATSA, our South African Tourism Association, has actually put together a set of guidelines and a tool to help people make more responsible and ethical choices when it comes to captive wildlife. So that is something that is available in the public domain.
And just to add to that, there is also the ACTA guidelines, which is evidence-based, British-based, and that is also maybe a more robust set of guidelines, but that also helps to make more considerations about venues to consider. So definitely two worth considering.
I see a hand. Edmund.
It's green is on. It's no use trying to stop all this unless you stop the demand. Otherwise, every single wild lion, just like every wild rhino, every wild anything, is going to be annihilated.
Thank you. That's a bit scary, but you're probably right.
So I do agree with you that there are like our slogan says, in unity there is strength. So in that way, every single part, whether it is the legal part, like whether it's the ministerial task team, whether it is the volunteering, whether it's the breeding, the hunting, but also the demand, and that is where the awareness comes in, whether it is a documentary, whether it's me going to Norway, speaking at the presentations for universities, whatever it is. And all these documentaries that are being made currently, you guys being here in this room, people that are watching, all of this is happening. And this is how demand, in my opinion, is going to decrease. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to have to wrap up. We have to leave the hall quite soon because I just have one question to Richard, which has come through, is where can public watch lion bones and bullets, and can the film be streamed and purchased?
This is an important question. I didn't have my microphone on. From Monday in South Africa on Water Day. That's it.
Thank you very much. I'm cautiously optimistic. Again, I think that we have, and this film, if that doesn't move anybody, I don't know what will. We also have people of the caliber sitting at this table who know what to do, who have their hearts in the right place, who are hugely experienced, two of whom are on the panel. And so I'm going to close by saying that yes, I'm cautiously optimistic, and I have been on and off for the last 10 years. I'm still hoping, but thank you very much, everybody, for coming. It's I think it's been a very informative and fascinating debate. And Richard, I wish you all the best with this extraordinary film that you have birthed with your team who are here. Could you stand up? The people who actually know. Thank you, everybody. There's still some croissants, although they're not warm early this morning. Thank you for coming. Thank you, everybody.
Your panel members, don't go. Richard, you look like you're going to run away. Stay seated, panel.